This is not a classroom. This is a tent. And this is not a document camera. This is a fire. And in the flickering flames today, you're going to hear about someone who's made more impact on world history than anyone else in the last 1,000 years. And I'm not an overworked professor. I'm a clan elder. And it is my privilege to relate these stories from the past to you today. And when we need to talk about the achievements of one individual here, we're going to talk about someone who, from complete obscurity and against all odds, rose up to make the largest empire ever in history. We're also going to talk about somebody who really single-handedly changed the medieval world into what became now the modern world. One person did all of those things, and I'm going to tell you about that today. Okay? But we have to go pretty far back into history to start. We have to go about 800 years back, first of all. And if we went back that far in history, what we would find is that there wasn't one international world. There were many separate worlds in what we call the world today. There were the European countries, the largest and most prosperous of which was Russia at that time. They had very little idea of anything on the other side of Eurasia. There was extremely populous, wealthy China, who had very little connection, if any, with Europe. So inventions in China stayed in China. Innovations in Europe stayed in Europe. There was also the Middle East, and except for the Crusades, this kind of crazy connection that had happened in the Middle Ages, there was really no connection of significance with the countries of the Middle East, with their innovations in geometry and in other sciences, with the metallurgy of Europe, or with the chemistry of China. None of these things were connected. That's what the Middle Ages is. It's a time when we had several worlds, and not one single international world. How did the situation get to be the way that it was 800 years ago? We have to go back an even further 800 years. And if we do that, we'll find that the world consisted of farming peoples, like the Romans, the Chinese, peoples of South Asia, who had been, their ancestors had been there for many, many thousands of years and became fairly thickly populated. But the food-producing peoples of the world who moved on to this interior area of Eurasia, they abandoned growing and planting and simply relied on their herds of animals, which they moved around with all year around. And they became the pastoralists. This happened later than farming. And pastoralists and farmers were basically enemies. Their lifestyles clashed. We see it in the Genesis of the Bible, Cain and Abel, pastoralist and the farmer. This was how history was for thousands of years. And during this time of history, it was almost always the pastoralists who won against the farmers. They had the better weapons. They had horses. They had mobility. And they had a lifestyle, since they moved around all year round anyway with animals and could survive out in the open and out in the wild. There was no difference between peace and war for them. Their mobile lifestyle was the same as military campaign, even in peace. And so the farmers could not compete with that. The main reason why the pastoralists didn't always take over the farmers is because there was one flaw in pastoral lifestyle. The patriarchal clans on the steppes, the short grasslands, were always fighting with each other. They wanted grassland, they wanted tribute, and no one could unite them. Only in a few instances in history did we have a strong man enough on the steppes that was able to unite a large enough portion of the steppes that they made a major impact on the farming societies, because they were fighting with the farmers and not with each other. That happened 2,500 years ago in North China when a people called the Xiongnu, who were immortalized in Walt Disney's movie, what was that movie? Mulan. And they were incorrectly called the Huns. Were united under a man named Modun, and he inspired the connecting of the Great Wall of China. He was that powerful. Then, later, we had a Western group called the Huns who rose up. Maybe they're the same people of the Xiongnu, but we don't know. And under their charismatic leader, Attila, several hundred years later, they made such an impact in European history that they precipitated the collapse of the Roman Empire. They ended the ancient world and began the medieval world. And in the vacuum that created once the Huns were collapsed, there's another group who rose up. Well, actually, there are two groups who rose up. The Turks and the Mongols. The Mongols in the east and the Turks in the center. The Turks won out over the Mongols in the 500s. And they conquered almost all of the steppes. And the steppes became populated mostly with Turkic peoples. There are over 30 different Turkic languages today, over 30 different Turkic nationalities, and 60, 70 million Turkic peoples. And that is the way that the steppes progressed since 500s, all through the Middle Ages. And the Mongols, the ancestors of the people we're really going to be talking about today, who I'm representing here by this campfire, and whose felt skins you are all sitting on to listen to me. And I'm grateful for your attention. Just like I'm grateful for this mountain out here that's giving us strength, which you think is Haggard Hall, but it is not. It's Northern Mongolia mountain. The Mongols were pushed into the forest. They were marginalized. It looked like their history was mostly over. It was the Turks that were in charge of all of the steppes. So 800 years passed since these times. And things didn't look like they would ever change. The Turks were still the majority of people on the steppe. Not only that, we had strong civilizations of farmers rising up. And Christianization from Europe was spreading onto the steppes from Russia. Muslim civilization was spreading into Central Asia. Turks were becoming Christians, were becoming Muslims. It looked even like the steppe nomad lifestyle was starting to disappear and get absorbed into the farming lifestyle. No one would have ever suspected that all this was going to completely change. No one would have ever suspected that the people who were in Russia at this time, looking over their vast wealthy farms, or in China, in the cities over 1 million people, that in a couple of generations, all of these people would be conquered by the same conquerors, people who had been marginalized completely until very recently. And when I put this picture up here, it is very interesting. One thing on it must really strike your eye. There's one little detail of this that must really, really strike your eye. There's no portraits of Chinggis Khan that were done during his lifetime, so don't try to look and see if he looks like himself. It's something that if I were you, I'd be really concerned about. I said that I alluded to the fact that this is the most person in the world history in the last 1,000 years. I think in the New York Times, the number of the most significant 100 people in the year 2000, I think he even beat out Madonna, slightly, but did. But there's something really interesting here. There's not even for sure known when he was born. This tells you that this is not a person who's born into some great wealth, into some great power. This is someone who was born in utter obscurity, who almost certainly would have, could have, remained in that obscurity. And yet, completely he came out of it and changed the world. So let's go 800 years ago, back to the East Asia during this period of time. We think Chinggis Khan was born in 1162. He may have been born in 1167. The situation that existed at that time was that all the western and central steppes were taken over by the Turks. They were the large people. They were the big movers and the shakers on the steppes, and they had been for several hundred years prior to that. Islam was moving on to the steppes. Russian Christianity was also moving on to the steppes. In the east, we have the remnant Mongol tribes who'd been pushed into the forest or the forest steppes by the Turks when they built their great empire in the 500s AD. One of these tribes was the Mongols. They were the most pushed away tribe. There were also a tribe called Merkid, Karyan, another tribe called Tatar. All of these spoke dialects of a language that we today call Mongol, which is quite different than Turkic languages, although some people think they came from a common origin. When this young man was born into Mongol tribe in the 1160s, his name was Temujin. Later did he acquire the title Chinggis Khan. He was born into a tribe that was fighting with all the other tribes around them and had been doing so for hundreds of years. And China itself was divided into 3 very wealthy, large countries during this period of time. The most wealthy part of China was the southern part, the Song dynasty, with its capital Hangzhou, which had over 1 million people. The north had been overrun by Manchurian peoples, and this was the very powerful Jin dynasty, who took tribute from some of the Mongol-speaking tribes on the steppes, who fought and encouraged them to fight with each other, to steal women from each other, to steal horses from each other. Then there was the kingdom of Xixia, the Tanguts, who may have been related to the modern Tibetans. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know about them, and I'll explain a little bit later in the lecture why we don't know. So this was the situation that existed. When in this tribe, a man named Yesuge, who is a clan chieftain in the Mongol tribe, killed a Tatar and returned home and took the Tatar's name that he killed and gave it to his newborn son, Temujin. And the son grew up, but the interesting thing with his son is that his mother had been kidnapped from another tribe. So the Merkid tribe was also at war with the Mongols, just like the Tatars were. And this was the situation that existed during the time that Temujin was growing up, moving around with animals on the steppe, in constant danger of being attacked or ambushed by enemies on all sides, having to be ready to flee into the forest at any time to save your life. The father didn't get along with the son for whatever reason. Temujin and his father didn't seem to get along, and his father tried to marry him off early and got him betrothed to a girl when he was about 9 years old in another tribe. And things looked like they were going to go pretty well, but then disaster struck, as it always did on the steppe after a certain small period of time. And some Tatars recognized Temujin's father, Yesuge, and as someone who had killed their kinsman, and they poisoned him. He was poisoned. And that meant that Temujin and his mother and his younger siblings were all left on the steppe without anyone to fend for them or defend them. And they had to go back up into the forest and survive by hunting animals. And the mother of Temujin, Holun, succeeded in getting the family to survive at this period of time. But it was very frustrating for this boy because he was surrounded by peoples who were constantly preying on his group and who were possibly going to enslave them at any point. And this indeed is what happened to Temujin. A period of time he survived as being enslaved by another group. And this ended when he escaped from that enslavement. He went back to find the girl that he'd been betrothed to a number of years earlier, and he actually succeeded to get married to her. She was still there waiting for him, Borte. And so Temujin and Borte get ready to have family, and everything looked like it's going to be wonderful. But what always happens when things are going well on the steppes? The weather changes. And if you go to the lecture this afternoon, you'll find out how weather can destroy all the animals in a very short period of time, something called zoot. But people can be destructive as zoot on the steppe. And what happened is some of the Merkids who saw that Temujin is married now, they remembered that Temujin's father stole Temujin's mother from them a generation earlier. It was like Hatfields and McCoys. So they decide they're going to steal his wife. So they steal Borte and take her back. Temujin has to make a decision. Does he just give up and find another wife? Or does he get some kinds of reinforcements and do something really unusual, go and attack against this tribe who has raided him to get back his wife? And he decides that's what he's going to do. And he goes to the clan of the Cariad people, who had been an ally of his father. And he offers to become like the son of the clan leader of Cariads, the Han of Cariads. And so, Onghang. And so together with him and other of the Mongols, they make a surprise attack on the Cariads, and they get his wife back. Okay? So this is the beginning of Temujin having his family group and having an alliance with Cariads. But Temujin very much dislikes how things are going among the Mongols, because always the steppe nomads are fighting with each other. They're killing each other, and there's no way that someone on the steppe can feel secure, and everyone's very poor because people are constantly stealing from each other. So he wants to change that, and he also wants to get revenge on the people who enslaved him. And so he gathers together his followers. He's a very talented military leader, it turns out, and he attacks this clan who had enslaved him. And usually when a steppe nomad group attacks another steppe nomad group, they just steal things, and the other group mostly runs away to fight another day. Temujin decides he wants to make permanent changes on the steppes. So when he captures another group, he organizes his followers so that they do not take any loot until all the group has been defeated and has been surrendered. And then he takes and he kills all the adult males who's taller than the wagon wheel spoke center. And then he incorporates the rest of them, not as slaves, into his own group, but as equal members, even adopting some into his family. So he starts causing different steppe nomad groups to disappear as ethnicities and to become part of his Mongol ethnicity. Not as subservient, but as equal members, just like the 50 states. Each state is inducted in the same equality as the last state was there. And this is why there's not been so many civil wars as there could have been in the United States, probably. So Temujin gradually builds up his people like this. Another thing he does is he makes sure that all of the booty that is taken from raiding and success at war is distributed equally to everybody, not just the ones who did the fighting get it and go away, because he remembers his family was left destitute when the warrior was killed at the head of the family. So he makes social welfare system for everyone. And soon all the people, they're very much loyal to him. And they're not loyal to the old clan chiefs who are in the lineages that are old aristocracies, because they don't treat their people quite as well as that. They don't give everyone equal. And so by 1204, Temujin has succeeded in defeating all the other local Mongol tribes here. He even defeats the Merkids again, and he defeats even the Karyats, and he defeats the Tatars as well, and incorporates all these peoples into his group, so that by 1206, almost exactly 800 years ago, he has succeeded in doing something no one's done before with the Mongols for several hundred years, uniting them all into one people. And this is a tribe, it is a people, it's an army, all together, all of those things at the same time. And they recognize him as their universal leader. And in that year, 1206, give him the title Chinggis Khan, which maybe means a world leader or universal leader. He becomes the leader of all tents. And he begins to expand. He even takes over some of the Turkic peoples in the west. And so for the first time ever on the steppes, there's peace in hundreds and hundreds of years. But there's no trade goods coming in, because the trade goods were brought by stealing, and no one's doing that anymore. So Chinggis Khan leads his people, and he hits up the Shisha for tribute. And he defeats their king, and he makes the Shisha begin to pay tribute to them. And that is the beginning of the steppe nomad empire of Chinggis Khan having effect on non-Mongol peoples, on non-Turkic peoples off of the steppes. So the Shisha promised him tribute and also promised to give him men if he goes into war. The Uyghurs hear about this. This is an ancient Turkic group that's been there for a very long period of time, and they decide that they think this person really is going somewhere, Chinggis Khan. And so even though Chinggis Khan doesn't even know they exist, even though Chinggis Khan doesn't even go against them in war, they send a delegation to his tent in the northern Mongol steppes, and they surrender to him. They introduce themselves and tell where they live, and then they surrender to him. That's pretty good. And another thing the Uyghurs give is an alphabet. They give a writing system to the Mongols. And the reason why we know so much about the early life of Temujin is that it is written down. Within a generation of his life, it's written down, this beautiful vertical script, The Secret History of the Mongols. And we know a lot about his early life. And a lot of the things in it are corroborated by other sources. And so it seems like it's a very reliable document. So the Mongols are extending their domination to this wealthy kingdom that gives them trade goods. And the Uyghurs give them administrative ability and writing system. But the big power on the block is the Jin dynasty, ruled by Manchurian tribes called the Jurchen. And the Jin dynasty does not like what's going on the steppes. Jin dynasty does not like that all of these tribes that used to sometimes pay tribute to their king is now united under this new leader. And so they send a delegation to demand that Chinggis Khan pay tribute and homage to their golden Khan back in what is now northern China. He doesn't want to do it. He refuses. And a war ensues. And this is the first major war between the steppe nomads in the east under Chinggis Khan and the sedentary peoples that are ruled in northern China by peoples from Manchuria who originally were horsemen. But the Mongol horsemen defeat the Jin horsemen on the steppes. And then they wear down each city and conquer it and slaughter its inhabitants. And all of North China falls to the Mongols eventually, with enormous amount of wealth coming into the Mongol tribes. All of this happens. And the Mongols also wind up taking control of an empire here, the Karakitai Empire, which is ruled by descendants of some other Mongols who used to be ruling in northern China. They're taken over. And the man who's in charge of that empire is actually an Nestorian Christian, the Karakitai, who's persecuting the Muslims that are there. And when Genghis Khan takes this area over, he decrees that there will be freedom of religion. This was unheard of in the medieval world, freedom of religion. He says that everyone just pay their taxes and they can worship as they please. And so this is the very innovative modern idea that people in mosques and in different kinds of Christian churches can all coexist without fighting with each other. This is the way the Mongols are going to rule as they expand their empire. Now already by this time, Genghis Khan, he's getting to be up there. He's in his late 50s. You know, there's no TIA CREF for retiring nomadic conquerors. So he's probably thinking of his future. And so maybe we don't know what he had in his mind, but it looks like he was thinking that he would become in charge of the trade routes that go from China to Central Asia. Central Asia is a fabulously wealthy place filled with Persian speakers and Turkic soldiers. And at that time was ruled by a Turk Muslim whose title was Khwarezm Shah, Muhammad II. Okay, and so the Mongols send a delegation to the Khwarezm Shah and propose that trade be enacted, that the Mongols, of course, would control, and this would be like their retirement. That would be like their 401k. You know, this controlling the trade route between these two wealthiest countries in the world. But the foolish governor of the province that's in the northernmost part of the Khwarezm Empire, he actually decides to rob the Mongol ambassadors, and even he killed a few of them. And this precipitates a war. And Genghis Khan takes one whole year to get himself ready for a war of revenge. This is the worst thing that you can do, is show disloyalty and treachery. Even when Genghis Khan has defeated one of his enemies, if somebody betrayed the enemy's king, he didn't like that. He didn't like treachery. So this is the worst thing that could happen. And he gathers all the Mongol groups and all the felt tent warriors he can find, and he puts them together in a year to go against the Khwarezm Empire in a war of annihilation and revenge. And he goes to the Shisha, who many years before had promised men if they would come to, if they had to produce men. Just like in War of the Rings, Lord of the Rings, the ones that were supposed to give the men and they didn't do it, and they became those skeletons. Well, same thing going to happen here, because the king of Shisha very arrogantly says to Genghis Khan before the campaign against the Khwarezm Central Asia, well, if you're so powerful, you don't need my men. And if you're not that powerful, you're not going to get them. So he's very rude. Genghis Khan didn't want to fight against him right away. He's always careful. And so he says, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back out to Central Asia. So he goes with 5 big armies into Khwarezm Empire. And he began to fight against Khwarezm Empire. The armies go along the whole border. And they keep going back and forth and attacking at different spots. So the Khwarezm Shah doesn't know where to concentrate his forces. And he gets all disorganized. Nomads can move around a lot easier than farmers. So if they do this hit and miss type of fighting, it really is very effective against the farming frontier. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan takes his largest army and he goes deep into the desert, to the Kizilkum Desert, the Red Sands Desert. He disappears for a few months. No one knows where he is. And all of a sudden, he goes, because he has befriended some of the nomads in this area, he comes 1,000 miles around and gets behind the enemy lines entirely and shows up one bright day right at the foot of one of the greatest cities in the Khwarezm Shah Empire, 1,000 miles away from the frontier where the war was supposed to be going on. This place is called Bukhara. It's one of the jewels, ancient farming city, oasis city, beautiful center of Muslim learning. And he besieges Bukhara and he reduces it, he conquers it. And he has almost all the people of Bukhara slaughtered underneath of this huge minaret, which is still there to be seen today, the minaret. And he, 1 out of 100, he sends off to the other cities to tell what happened and what's going to happen to them if they don't immediately surrender. The Mongols have a custom that if you surrender right away without fighting, you're fine. If you surrender after fighting, you're in deep trouble. Because even if you surrender, you're going to be punished. So one by one, the cities of the Khwarezm Empire fall, the armies begin to desert, and the Khwarezm Shah ruler runs away and hides on an island in the Caspian Sea, and he drops dead of exhaustion. Meanwhile, the Mongols, destroying one city after another, they go hunting for him, don't know that he's died. They go all the way around Caspian Sea, go through the countries of Armenia, Georgia, conquer these countries, and then they come out in the steppes of Europe. Steppe nomads have come out of Asia into these steppes for a very long period of time. And he meets the Turks there and defeats them, and then he meets a combined army of the Turks and the Russians. The Russians are there at this time and defeats them as well. And this is just a taste of what's going to happen. This wasn't Chinggis Khan that was leading this. It was his great general Subutai. And Subutai defeats everyone in this entire area and then goes back to the main war. But by the time he gets back, everything's already finished. There's been a tremendous destruction of most of the cities of Central Asia. These cities that have been there sometimes for 10,000 years laid waste. The population is slaughtered. No one even knows how many millions of people have been killed. But the whole place is just decimated. And Chinggis Khan, he gets tired of this campaign. And so he organizes his men in the largest hunt that has ever been in world history. And they surround an area about the size of Great Britain just to kind of loosen up from all that war. And then they hunt all the animals in this area. And then they go back home. And then they have a score to settle with the Shisha king. And they begin to attack to punish the Shisha king. This is in 1226, 1227. Unfortunately, Chinggis Khan, who's out hunting, runs into some wild horses, and the wild horses spook his horse, and the greatest nomad conqueror in history falls off his horse and gets internal injuries, which in a few weeks kill him. So in August 1227, he dies. And the Mongol soldiers are so angry that when they defeat the Shisha, they kill everyone in the whole country. They destroy everything. We don't even know what language they spoke. Everything is destroyed. And this normally would be the end of the Mongol Empire. When Modun died, everything fell apart. When Attila died, everything fell apart. Even when the great Turk Khans died, things fell apart. Because one person who has charisma needs to be the one to organize all this. Chinggis Khan has done something on the steppe that no one had done before him. He not only got all the organization of everyone on the steppe that he defeated, but he also completely changed the ethnicity and the nationality by mixing the tribes together into one huge army. So there weren't any more Merkids or Karyids or Naimans or Tatars. There were just Mongols. Mongols are later going to get called Tatars in the West, but there's just this one huge nation. Nobody had made a huge nation on the steppe. So even when Chinggis Khan dies, that nation is still there. And his sons and his grandsons succeed in taking it over. And so Chinggis Khan has 4 sons, and the one of them, the third one, winds up being elected the Great Han. And here he is, Ogedei is his name. And he has inherited this vast area, 4 times the size of the Roman Empire, and even larger than what Alexander conquered. All of this area, the Mongol tribes have succeeded under Chinggis Khan in conquering this enormous area, and now it has to be governed. Ogedei decides that he's going to have to build a city. He's going to do something no Mongol has done. And he builds a city right in the center called Black Walls, Karakorum. Karakorum in modern Mongolian. And here is the actual walls. There's a Buddhist monastery that's on the site of it today. So the Mongols have this vast city. And Ogedei is in charge, and he asserts his authority. He puts down rebellions in northern China, and then the Mongols have another big get-together, like a caucus. You know how we have caucuses? The Mongols have a big caucus, which is called Khurta. And the last time they had this, they elected Temujin as the Great Han. Now they elected, Good Day is a great hung, but they have to decide something else. What are they going to do with themselves now? They want to go to war against somebody else. And so there are two parties of Mongols, and they don't know what they're going to do. One party of Mongols decides they want to fight against Russia and Europe. The ones that went around on that big journey, they liked all the grass there. They want to go, plus Genghis Khan bequeathed to his eldest son's family all of Russia and Europe without knowing how far it was. Seems like it'd be a good idea to conquer it. So half of the Mongols want to go in that direction. The other half says, no, China is the big prize. Great cities, huge amount of wealth. And so half of the Mongols want to go conquer China in 1235. They have this big powwow and they can't decide what to do. So they make a compromise. They'll conquer both simultaneously. So they send two vast armies, one going into Russia. And this army is the largest army that has probably ever been fielded in history before. Something upwards to 200,000 of the best troops and also engineers from Central Asia and from northern China, siege engineers. And this army comes in 1236, 1237. It comes across the Volga River. In the wintertime when it's frozen, they put bags of dirt on the ice so the horses could walk across. That's their bridge. Russia had never been conquered before. Russia was a country longer than the United States is today a country. Over 250 years. It had never been conquered by anyone. There was just skirmishes by the Turkic steppe nomads against the Russians. They had no idea that they would ever be conquered by anyone in their history, any more than we would have the idea that in the United States to be conquered. The Mongols come in with this army. The Russians have no clue what is emerging out of the east onto their steppe lands. And one by one, the Mongols destroy each Russian city. They surround it, they starve it, they bombard it, and then they slaughter the inhabitants. And in the next 4 years, almost every single Russian city is destroyed by the Mongols. It's the same, almost like nuclear war. The last city to fall is one of the greatest Christian cities in Europe, Kiev, that is rumored to have 40 churches, 40 times 40 churches in some of the manuscripts. This was a great center of Christianity. It refuses to submit to the Mongols, and it is also hammered open, the city, and it is destroyed. And even 5 years after the Mongols conquered, people who have gone, are emissaries on the Mongol trade routes on the steppes report that no one lives there anymore, and the whole plain is covered with human remains, as far as the eye can see from the aftermath of the Mongol conquests. So all of Russia is laid waste, but that's not really what the Mongols came for. What instead they came for is to go farther on. There's grasslands farther on. So after destroying Russia, they move into Europe, and part of them go up to Poland and Germany and defeat the Poles. And then a huge force is gathered in the north, who are all of the Knights Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights who have never been defeated in the north. They all, twice as many of them, fight with the Mongols. But the Mongols have their heavy cavalry. They have arrows that can shoot farther than the European arrows. They're much faster and more maneuverable. So they set up a smoke screen and they get the Europeans to string out, and they surround them and they destroy them like it's a fox hunt. And at the end of the battle, they destroy the entire Northern European army that was originally twice as large as them. And at the end of the day, they have someone to count all the bodies. They cut off the left ear of each corpse, and 9 huge sacks are filled by the end of the day. Meanwhile, the southern army has gone into Hungary. Hungary is not a little country back then. Hungary is this huge country that has a warlike tradition because the Hungarians themselves came from steppe nomads. They have the best cavalry in Europe, and they have a really good king, Bela the Fourth. And this king is ready to fight with the Mongols. He has the best army, over 60,000. The Mongols again are outnumbered in the group that has come to the south. And so the Mongols are hesitant to get into the fight with Bela. But Bela has problems himself because his nobles won't support him. And the nobles get in a fight with some of the Turkic steppe nomads who had gone to Hungary to run away from the Mongols and who Bela wanted to use as auxiliaries against the Mongols. They wind up fighting with the Hungarians instead and leaving. So the fight starts. Bela's 60,000 fighting with the Mongols. The Mongols tried to surround them, but there's not enough Mongols. Then, at the crucial time, the army of the north that has just destroyed the Germans and the Poles comes down and joins the other Mongol force. The Hungarians are completely destroyed. The whole army is destroyed. The king's brother is killed. King Bela himself is wounded and has to flee on a horse, and he hides out in an island in the ocean. And so already in 1341, we have Mongols on the edge of Italy, conquer everything. We have other Mongols fighting in Korea and in central China. This has never happened in world history before. The Mongols settle down for the winter, and they're preparing an attack on Vienna. They're preparing an attack into Italy. All of Europe looks like it's going to fall. There's no great army left after these ones that were defeated by the initial Mongol invasion. And all of a sudden, the Europeans look out in one day in December 1241, and there are no Mongols there. They're all gone. And the Europeans talk themselves into thinking that they beat the Mongols. But what really had happened is that word had reached the Mongols by this wonderful Pony Express that Ogedei had died way back in Karakoram. He was a real big drinker, drank himself to death. His elder brother, Chagatai, tried to get him to stop drinking, convinced him to only drink 2 cups of alcohol per day, whereupon Ogedei had made 2 huge cups out of iron. And so he died. And so all the Mongols have to go back to Karakoram to decide what to do about the next great Han. And some of the Mongol grandsons of Chinggis Khan are fighting each other. They are not getting along. They all have to go back. So the campaign ends in Europe. The Mongols didn't like Europe much anyways, too many trees. And they decide to just stick with Russia. And during the great arguments that ensue in the next 4 or 5 years, there are a number of queens who are ruling the Mongols. And there are no more major Mongol offensives during this period of time. Okay, so what we have now in 1242 is the Mongols still have their capital at Karakoram. They've not only conquered all of the steppes in northern China, they've also conquered all of Eastern Europe and Russia. Russia remains under the Mongols for 250 or more years. Finally, in 1246, 1247, there is a new Han, but he is not getting along with some of the others. So the Mongols that take over Russia sort of set themselves up as a kind of semi-independent group, which called the Golden Tent or the Golden Horde. And this is the one that is ruling Russia. That group connives with a group that is in northern China against the great Han. And when the great Han dies, they get together and decide that the next great Han is the son of the youngest son of Chinggis Khan, not the third son. And Monk Han becomes the great Han in 1250, 1251. And so that is again the next phase of Mongol World War is going to start happening. The Mongols weren't able to conquer all of China during that other war when they were conquering Russia so successfully. China was a lot harder nut to crack. And so the next phase of conquest is going to again be the rest of China, but this time the Middle East. The Middle East is going to be conquered. So one of the grandsons of Chinggis Khan is sent to the Middle East with a huge army. And the other grandson, Kublai, is sent to China to fight against the southern Chinese. And Hulak is very successful in 1256, 1258 in Central Asia. He destroys the remnant of the caliphate. He besieges Baghdad and kills the last caliph of Baghdad, which had been in ruling for hundreds and hundreds of years. Baghdad is utterly destroyed. No non-Muslim has ever done this in history before. And the Mongols conquer all of the rest of the Middle East here too. They also conquer what is today Syria. And things look like nothing can stop them. They're getting ready to invade Egypt. They're getting ready to go down into Saudi Arabia, the heart of the Muslim world. No one has ever devastated the Muslims like the Mongols. The Crusades, who happened a couple centuries earlier, they never got but a few miles inland. They didn't do even a fraction of the damage that the Mongols did to the Muslims. The Mongols almost destroyed the Muslim world in the 1200s. Crusaders were like a little mosquito, and that was all. So it looks like the Muslim world is going to end. But then what happens is the great Han again dies in Mongolia. And he dies on campaign against China. And when he dies, what happens is there is no possibility to get a new great Han that everyone agrees with. In 1260, all these things start coming unraveled. The Han of the Golden Horde refuses to accept the Han in China, Kublai, as great Han. And so there's a fight in China as to who gets to be great Han. Also, the ruler of Golden Horde gets very angry that the new Hulagu in Middle East has taken some of his lands on the edge of the domain, and he attacks fellow Mongols. This has not happened since the rise of Chinggis Khan. Mongols have to send reinforcements against their own brethren at this period of time, and the force that they leave to invade Egypt is not strong enough, is not big enough. And the rulers of Egypt, in fact, are horsemen from the steppes who have gone down into Mediterranean, ancient Turks who are there. They're called the Mamluks. And for the first time ever in history, the Mongols are defeated. The Mongols are defeated at a battle called Ain Jalut, which is exactly at the spot in the Bible where David is said to have slain Goliath. The Mongols are defeated by the Mamluks. And this is the end of the United Mongol Empire, because Golden Horde is going to be fighting with Hulagu, who becomes the other Han, the Ilkhan. And in the east, Kublai fights first with one of his brothers, and then he fights with one of his cousins, because he wants to make China into a new dynasty ruled by Mongols, and not just conquered by Mongolia. He wants to make the capital in China, and he succeeds in doing that. So instead of one Mongol empire, we have several Mongol empires in the second half of the 1300s. And yet at the same time, all of these areas, once some of the initial wars were over, unite with each other, at least in trade. And there are trade routes that go all the way from China and Korea to Hungary. And you can cross these steppes in 2 weeks. This is almost incredible. Only in the modern age did we have so much good transportation. The Mongols invent the first kind of credit card, first corporate credit card, these kinds of things that messengers wear, that is made out of gold or silver or wood, and they allow someone to go and get free on the Han's tab room and board in each of these little stops along the way. And so the Pony Express is invented, the world's largest free trade center is invented, the world's largest zone of freedom of religion is invented during this period of time, and that causes all sorts of technologies from China to make their way to Europe in the next century. This is the legacy of the Mongols. The Mongols bring Chinese chemistry, Chinese gunpowder, Chinese paper into Europe, and that mixes with European metallurgy and eventually leads to printing press, leads to guns. These are things that are made possible when the Mongols unite all these pieces of the medieval world. The Mongols bring chemistry of Middle East and China together. The beautiful blue that is made on the top of the mosques, it is brought to China, it becomes Blue Willow China. And so Mongols connect and unite all of these people in the 1300s, in the next century when they're ruling. And after the Mongols' era is over, what we have is not the medieval world anymore. We have a much more united, getting to be a single world, getting to be global village, where Mongolian ambassadors are going to be in London. Mongol ambassador was attending a Christmas service in 1294 in London Cathedral. This was almost unheard of. And we have Muslims coming into Europe. We have Muslims coming into northern China. We have Marco Polo, who you've all heard about. That was just the tip of the iceberg of what happened. And so this one individual and his sons and grandsons, because of their ability to unite the steppe nomads and to use them as this one huge force, a family, an army, was able to make the largest empire in history. And this empire not only was the steppe lands, which maybe it was once or twice when we had charismatic steppe leaders in the past, but it was also all of Russia, eventually all of China, eventually much of India and much of the Middle East. All of this was united for the first and last time ever in one single huge country. And this is why the modern world came out of the Middle Ages. This is what jump-started the modern world. And this all is due to one man who was posthumously granted the title of the Emperor of China by his grandson. And this portrait was made of Chinggis Khan as the Emperor of China. Even though the Mongols didn't succeed in conquering China until about 50 years after Chinggis Khan himself had already died. So this is just a little bit of the history of the Mongols. And usually the Mongols are told about in history as these terrible conquerors and all sorts of bad things about them. And those things are true as well. But the other part of the history of Mongols that is not usually told, I told today, the spreading of all of this innovation and technology that wound up being the modern world. But you can't ignore the other part that I left over, because Mongols' conquests were tremendously destructive in certain parts of the world and had a permanent. Much of Central Asia reverted to desert. Afghanistan used to be a very good farming place. All of the irrigation was destroyed. Those areas never recovered. Medieval Burma, very strong central government, was destroyed by the Mongols, and it never recovered. Russia, in some ways, either you could say never recovered, or it recovered in a very different way than its history would have been otherwise, because the new Moscow Khan, or Tsar, was very much an absolute ruler, very different than the rulers before the Mongols. And the history of Russia was very much changed by the Mongols. So when you want to look at the legacy of the Mongol conquests, the only thing that is definitely true that you can say from either side is that you cannot understand world history without understanding what the Mongols did, good and bad. And you can't understand how that happened unless you understand the details of the life of one single individual, Chinggis Khan Temujin, who really should be looked at as the most influential person of the last 1,000 years of human history, because he did so many things that were not on the drawing board to be done in history, that had never been done before and have not been done since. And really, you have to look on the beginning of the Mongols as the beginning of international studies. And that is what I'm giving this lecture for, Center for International Studies. This is the lecture series for international studies, and it's very fitting that we're talking about Chinggis Khan in international studies. So thank you for your attention, and maybe we have a little bit of time for some questions. I put some more wood on the fire here, get it going. There's lots more ways we could go with all these stories, and I didn't tell you lots of things, so I have to teach at one, but I have about 8 minutes that I could answer questions before my next class. Yes, please.
Are you taking another group to Mongolia?
Well, this last time we didn't take a group, but what the idea is, if we can get the Mongol language going here at Western this year and next year, the following summer we'll be able to take a group of students over to Mongolia. This is an idea. We're going to start teaching the Mongol language this winter time in the afternoons. Yeah, question, please.
When they were spreading to the west, was there examples of countries that surrendered?
Yeah, the Uyghurs surrendered, and some of the Turkic tribes surrendered, and the Turkic tribes in the west who surrendered and survived and became part of Chinggis Khan's army, because they had gotten absorbed into the Mongols, they get called by this ancient Mongol tribal term, Tatar, which had nothing to do with the Turks. And that's why we call them Tatars. The Turks in the West and in Russia are called Tatars. When the Europeans heard this name, that sounded like Greek word for hell, Tartary. So Greeks put the R in it, because this devil's horseman coming to destroy all of Christianity. And so that's why Europeans incorrectly say Tartars. And then because these people were steppe nomads, they had all kinds of milky sauces, and we get tartar sauce. And if you don't brush the teeth, you're going to get a tartar on your teeth. So see how far the steppes have penetrated? Yeah, so there were other groups that surrendered. In fact, if you look at the map of modern Eurasia, the ones that still are there are the ones that surrendered. The ones that aren't there are the ones that kept fighting. Yeah, please. Yeah, there are different biographies of Chinggis Khan. Some of them focus on what I was talking about in the most of this lecture, like the biography called Chinggis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. By the way, the word Chinggis is in Mongolian. In Persian, it was called Genghis, and that's what your English usually got. It's the same name, though. Jack Weatherford, Genghis Khan and Making of the Modern World is very much a presentation like I give here. There's also other stories about Chinggis Khan that make him out to be this bloodthirsty monster destroying everything, and they don't tell about anything else. There are a lot of those. So if you look in Western's library, which has such a fantastic collection, and here's our fantastic librarian here, we have lots of biographies of Chinggis Khan of all sorts. Yeah, please. His father's poisoned. Why or how? The Mongols poison people all the time because they didn't want to get blood of other people on their hands, and it was a lot easier to sneak and poison than to have to do the fighting, which they were real good at if they had to. But see, Temujin's father, Yasuke, he had killed one of the Tatars, and even took the name of the Tatar for his son. And then the relatives of that person happened to notice him, and he didn't realize who they were, and so they poisoned him. And then he got sick and died on the way home. This was a very common thing that happened. Even one or two of the great Hangs may have been poisoned. It is possible. Yeah.
You were saying that his mother was able to keep the whole family going.
Yeah, she was the strong one.
Do we know any more about her?
We don't know as much about her except that she was stolen. She was already married to somebody, and Yasuke stole her as his second wife. And Temujin was the son of the second wife. He's in a subservient position. Father Yasuke already had a first wife, Sochige, who already had a son older than Temujin, who was lording it over him all the time. Temujin got fed up with it when he was 10, and he killed his older brother. Yeah? And so that the mother we don't know as much about as we could, because we don't know about her childhood, and we just know that she's very angry at her younger son for killing her stepson, I guess it would have been. And that also made Chinggis Khan being able to be hunted and enslaved by other Mongols, that he killed his own kin. That was the reason, one of the reasons he got enslaved. Yeah. But Mongol women, and I'm talking about men all the time, they were the ones that had all really impact in the history. Because during the time when the Hans were fighting with each other, it was the women who were ruling everything. In the middle of the 1200s, it was the women, the wives, the daughters. They're the ones that were calling all the shots. They're the ones that decide who gets to be the great Han and making the organization of the empire. So they're really very important in Mongol history. And they don't fare very well if they get on the wrong side of losing civil war. If you read the biography by Jack Weatherford that talks about these warring queens, it's called, this chapter. Very interesting to read. Yes, Holland, she very important person. Yeah, some more question maybe. Very good. So I'll open the smoke hole a little wider here, and we all go out. But I encourage you to read more about Chinggis Khan. I only scratched a tiny bit of the surface of what could be told about the Mongols. And there's lots more to know and learn. So thank you very much. Ich Barfra.